Some of the scariest mysteries and true crime stories are the ones that, even when solved, leave us feeling as if there's more to the mystery just under the surface. These solved mysteries had some unexpected and creepy endings, which only made the original scary case even stranger. Number 5. Almost 4 decades later, the creepy mystery of what happened to Mary Hammond one September morning in 1983 was finally solved in 2022 when police revealed the identity of the man that they believe took her life. The mysterious disappearance of 25-year-old Mary shocked the close-knit community where she lived, and for decades, Mary's friends and family searched for answers. It was 3 a.m. on September 8th, and Mary went missing after leaving her home in Brantford, Ontario, Canada. Half an hour later, her husband would get a strange phone call from her coworker asking where Mary was and beginning the investigation into this creepy case. Mary was unlikely to disappear on her own because she was described as a shy young woman, but friendly to those that knew her. She was well loved by her family, especially her nieces and nephews. About 4 months earlier, she had married a man named Lawrence, who she had known for 4 years. The couple lived about a 20-minute walk from Mary's work at the Buns Master Bakery on Morton Avenue. The night before Mary vanished without a trace, the couple had been out, as had much of the community. A deal had been reached between workers and the Massey Ferguson factory, which was a major employer in the area, and they would be going on strike. There was a celebration, but the Hammonds left early. Lawrence's car was in the shop, and Mary needed to get up early for her morning shift at the bakery. The events, as explained by true crime reports, indicate that Lawrence offered Mary a lift the next morning, but it's likely he simply offered to walk with her, as he would sometimes do. Mary declined and left the house at 3:30 a.m. She should have arrived early with plenty of time for her 4 a.m. shift. When 4 a.m. came and there was no sign of Mary, her coworker called Lawrence to find out why she had apparently gone missing. Believing he would quickly solve the mystery, Lawrence traced the path that he knew his missing wife would have taken. She would have passed the Massey Ferguson factory and cut across a field at the back of the bakery. The unsolved mystery grew creepier when Lawrence found Mary's footprints in the grass in the field. Her tracks led up to the point where the field met the bakery boundary, but no further. At this point, Lawrence contacted police. It was about 5 a.m., likely an hour since Mary had mysteriously vanished without a trace. The police searched the field where Mary's last steps were found and discovered one of her white socks. No shoes were ever found. They also found items from her lunch, including a cup, a dish, and a half-eaten apple. Police immediately believed this case was the result of foul play and began to search for Mary on land and by air, but no other trace of her was ever found. It was believed Mary had gotten into a vehicle of some kind after leaving the field, though it seemed unlikely she did so willingly. Some of Mary's coworkers reported seeing a brown pickup truck leaving from behind the bakery around the time Mary would have vanished. The two underwent hypnosis to try to get more details about the truck, but all that was revealed was that it had painted bumpers and round headlights. Police appealed for information about the suspicious truck and about Mary, and hundreds of tips were added to her missing person case, and they were followed up on. Police even followed a tip from a supposed psychic who thought they had a vision that would help solve the mystery, which years later would still unfortunately remain unsolved. Every few years, local investigators would reopen the cold case files, hoping fresh eyes would finally help them get to the bottom of the creepy mystery. In 2012, the police obtained a search warrant for a house near where Mary had once lived. It wasn't believed the current owners had anything to do with Mary's disappearance, but one of the previous residents may have left behind a clue that could heat up the cold case. Evidence was taken from the house to be examined, though what that was never revealed. No human remains were ever found. The case went unsolved for another 8 years, with no breakthroughs until 2020, when police released images of 4 men that they wanted to talk to. The surveillance photos appeared to be CCTV images, though where from wasn't released. It wasn't clear if police believed they had anything to do with Mary's disappearance, but they might have had information that could help solve the cold case. In 2022, police finally had a follow-up lead regarding the photos. A suspect named Stephen Mudko was 36 years old at the time of Mary's disappearance. He had a repeated criminal history with women and had served time after holding a missing person against her will. Just days after Mary vanished, police had searched his home and found inconclusive evidence that they put into storage. It was only with the advancement of DNA analysis that police were able to properly examine the evidence using forensic technology. In June, the forensic evidence fingered Mudko as responsible for Mary's unsolved disappearance. Mudko would never face justice for taking her life, though, as he had passed away in 2010. The cold case is now mostly solved, but her final destination remains unknown. Police have continued to appeal for information as they try to locate her remains so her family can get the final closure that they need. Number 4. In January of 1981, an unsolved mystery that had baffled police experts for years was eventually solved much later when Peter Sutcliffe was finally arrested. Sutcliffe had taken the lives of 13 women and tried to do the same to at least 7 more. These scary encounters culminated in one of the most expensive manhunts in British history. And for years, police were left confused by the mysterious events and false leads surrounding his crimes. There were many reasons why Sutcliffe was able to remain on the loose for so long, including lots of flaws in his criminal investigation. But Sutcliffe himself had one person to thank for helping him escape capture. The unknown person was called Wareside Jack, and even as Sutcliffe was sentenced to life in prison, the mystery of who Wareside Jack was remains unsolved. By March of 1978, the lives of 7 women had been lost in the north of England, and the spat of scary encounters was dominating the news. But police didn't appear to be very close to solving the mystery of the person responsible for these unsolved crimes. George Oldfield, leading the investigation into the Yorkshire Ripper, as the criminal had become known, was sent a letter by an anonymous individual calling himself Jack the Ripper. The letter mocked a criminal sketch that had been published in newspapers, a sketch that very closely resembled Sutcliffe, but the main emphasis of the letter stressed that most of the victims were street workers, an important connection that the writer didn't believe criminal investigators were looking into enough. He also expressed a bizarre and sincere regret for taking the life of a person who didn't engage in that line of work. Oldfield didn't receive the letter straight away. The investigation into the Yorkshire Ripper was a mess, with lots of clues that had been left behind on index cards that were apparently not looked into any further. So it's unsurprising that Oldfield didn't get the taunting letter. Unhappy with the lack of response, the scary person then wrote to the Daily Mirror, a British newspaper. It most likely repeated what had been in the earlier letter. The mysterious individual warned that if anybody else became a victim of the Ripper, it would be their own fault and the fault of the press for not warning them. The Mirror went to the police, who only then discovered the earlier letter to Oldfield. Neither were immediately made public, but were seen as important clues into the identity of the criminal responsible for these scary cases. 2 more women would have their lives taken by the Ripper before the next letter was sent. This one was sent to the police. The 3rd letter was the one that most convinced the police this wasn't a random hoax. In many true crime cases, police will only reveal certain details to the public when appealing for information. That's so if someone claims responsibility for a crime, there are unexplained events that only the police and the person responsible would know of. In the 3rd letter, sent March of 1979, Jack spoke about his most recent victim. He said that she had mentioned being in the hospital and joked that she wouldn't have to worry about hospitals anymore. Her being in the hospital was an eerie detail that police didn't believe they had made public, lending further credibility to the strange letter. It also appeared that they had gotten close to solving the mystery just a month earlier. Jack revealed that he had come close to taking a woman's life when a police car stopped outside the alley that he and the woman were in. The woman said not to worry about the police, and Jack wrote the chilling phrase, "Little did she know that copper saved her neck." 2 months later, the scary unsolved mystery hit a morose milestone as the Ripper took the life of his 10th victim. A cassette tape was sent to George Oldfield, and he received it on June 17th. The creepy audio recording was 10 minutes long, and further adds to the confusion on this mysterious case. A man with a northeastern accent read from what sounded like a script. He said his name was Jack and that he had respect for the police officer, but not his team, adding that the detectives were no closer to solving the case and catching him now than they had been 4 years ago. The previous letter had hinted to another unsolved mystery that had taken place back in 1975. Police believed it referred to Joanne Harrison, a woman of the night who had been found lifeless in a garage, but whose case had not been linked to the scary mysteries of the Yorkshire Ripper. The most notable part of the tape was the accent. A survivor had told police the Ripper had sounded local, and not at all like the northeastern accent of the voice in the tape. But police believed the tape was legitimate, and a shortened version of the creepy audio recording was released in hopes that it would help solve the mystery. Meanwhile, Sutcliffe had been interviewed multiple times by police, and his handwriting had been compared to that of the note, and it didn't match. His accent was also completely different. Sutcliffe took the lives of 3 more women before he was finally caught. It was a chance encounter that finally solved the scary mystery, as he was pulled over with a street worker in his car. Sutcliffe confessed, but said the notes and audio recordings weren't from him. In the 80s, the advancements in forensic DNA testing were still limited. Saliva had been found on the envelopes, but the only thing that could be determined from it was that the person had type B blood. Sutcliffe was not a match, therefore it could not have been his saliva on the envelope. The letter writer finally got the nickname he would be known as, Wareside Jack. After the Yorkshire Ripper was found, there wasn't a lot of motivation within the police force to solve the creepy mystery behind Wareside Jack. However, the local press were keen to get to the bottom of the mystery, and even launched their own campaign to try to find Wareside Jack. With police appearing reluctant to investigate the mystery, it was speculated that a police officer was actually the one responsible. Even retired police officers were making the accusation that it had been a disgruntled police officer responsible. Internal investigations by the police have found no evidence that Wareside Jack was a police officer, but many thought this investigation to be little more than a hoax. In 2014, local police began an extensive review of cold case files, which included an investigation of Wareside Jack. A complete DNA profile was extracted from a single remaining envelope that had not been destroyed. 1 year later, forensic investigators had found a match. John Samuel Humble was a Sunderland-born man who had been arrested a few years earlier for driving behind the wheel after having one too many. A DNA sample was taken as a standard routine and was found to match the letter. The scary mystery was solved with Humble's confession. He had been 22 years old and obsessed with scary mysteries when he started sending the letters as a way to help them solve the case. He says he originally intended to point out the connection between the Ripper's targets and their occupation, and nothing more. He knew about one of the victims being in the hospital because it was mentioned in a single news report. Police mistakenly thought this information had never been made public. Humble claimed that after he discovered how seriously the voice recording was being taken, he had called the Ripper team to confess that it was a hoax, but analysts said that his voice hadn't matched that of the tape, and his claim was dismissed. His life had spiraled out of control because of how responsible he felt for the hoax that had misled police and potentially caused more harm than good. He was sentenced to 8 years for interfering with the criminal investigation, and the cold case mystery was finally solved. He served 4 years and passed away in 2019. Number 3. It wasn't until decades later that police in Sweden announced that they had finally solved the mysterious assassination of Prime Minister Olof Palme. Stig Engström was announced as the person responsible for taking Palme's life in 1986. Even with the greater mystery solved, it's still one of the scariest cases in Sweden's history because of the disruption that the loss of a prime minister caused. And investigators continue to follow up on the many smaller details that still need explaining. At the time of his displacement, Palme was a leftist leader of the Swedish Social Democratic Party, and a divisive figure in Western politics. He opposed what he viewed as the meddlesome politics of the USSR, the United States, Kurdistan, and also disagreed in many ways with South African policies, all of which earned him many enemies abroad and at home. But even so, Palm didn't appear to be all that concerned about his safety. According to most sources, he tried to live as normal of a life as possible, and would often dismiss his bodyguards and personal security, though this fact was later debated by his son Joachim. But his father allegedly did this on the evening of February 28, 1986. Palm had spent the day at work and came home to his wife Lisbeth at 6:30 p.m. He had already dismissed his security, as he hadn't thought he'd be going out again for the night. But while she was at work, Lisbeth called her son Martin and talked about going to see the 9 p.m. showing of the film The Mozart Brothers. Palm agreed to come with them. After the movie, the two couples went their separate ways at about 11:15 p.m. Palm and his wife walked along one of the busiest streets in Stockholm towards the subway station. They were at the intersection when the following mysterious events took place. Palm's life met an unexpected ending when an unknown man in a dark coat swiftly delivered his fate at point-blank range from behind. An unsuccessful attempt was then made on Palm's wife, at which point the lone man fled the scene of the crime. Lisbeth survived, but her husband did not. Taxi drivers in the area were on their radios reporting the mysterious events in real time, so that dispatchers could contact the police. It took only a couple minutes for police to arrive, but did not know that the Prime Minister was involved, and so the crime scene was not closed off, and witnesses were permitted to leave. All of this made it even harder to solve this already scary case. Even when police cordons were put up, lots of crime scene evidence went missing when people went past to place flowers on the spot where Palm had fallen. The flowers further contaminated the crime scene evidence, as did the footprints left behind by the mourners, who likely covered up the footsteps of the criminal responsible for the true crime. Later, some of the missing evidence, such as a discharged round, were collected and handed in by the random people. The investigation was only met with further flaws. When police appealed for one of the many witnesses to come forward with the description of the person responsible, descriptions of the unknown man varied. Most said that he was of medium height and wore a dark-colored coat, while others described a blue jacket. Some said that he wore a hat of different variations, but many said he was carrying a bag of some kind. One of the most prominent witnesses at the crime scene was a person famously referred to as the Scandia Man. Stig Engström was a graphic designer who worked for the company Scandia, which was based near the scene of the crime. According to Engström, he had left work a few minutes before the unexplained events had taken place, and had been one of the first on the scene. He was a leading figure in the effort to try to save the Prime Minister's life, and had spoken to Lisbeth. He went to the media and did countless interviews about what had happened. That only made the police investigation even harder, as other witnesses were influenced by what he said. However, most disputed Engström's supposedly true story. Most of those who said that they had seen him said that he had hung back and hadn't been part of the rescue attempt. Engström was dismissed as an attention seeker. There were multiple theories about who was responsible for the crime. The initial investigation focused on the belief that the creepy mystery was perpetrated by Kurdish rebels. Palm had once spoken in opposition to the Kurdish conflict in Turkey. A raid on a local bookshop allegedly serving as the organization's base of operations found no evidence linking them to the crime. Every few years, the possibility that Kurdish rebels were responsible would resurface, but there was no evidence and the case remained unsolved. The unsolved mystery had a case break years later in December of 1988, when it was revealed that a petty criminal named Christer Peterson had access to a weapon that matched the one used on Palm. He was a man with substance problems who didn't have a motive, and police never found the weapon or any forensic evidence linking him to the cold case. Still, Lisbeth Palm identified the suspect out of a police lineup, but she had been influenced before seeing the lineup. She had been told the suspect had substance problems, and she reasoned that he was the only one who looked like someone with that sort of issue. He was found guilty and sentenced to life, but he appealed the sentence and the following year was set free due to a lack of evidence. no further arrest in the case would ever be made. Over the decades, numerous conspiracy theories were put forward to explain the unsolved mystery. Agents working for the South African government, Swedish political opponents, and agents working for the weapons manufacturers were all suggested. There were also many confessions, mostly from individuals looking to make themselves famous, but high-ranking members of the Kurdish rebel group and the South African Intelligence Agency also claimed their respective groups were responsible. But it was none of these that would be named by police in 2020, when the mystery was recently solved. Instead, Engstrom was named as the man responsible for this long cold case. He wasn't just an attention seeker, but was a man with military training and access to the sort of weapon that was used. He did not like Palm's politics, and according to the true crime reports, he had left work with plenty of time to get to the scene of the crime. For unknown reasons, he was armed when he crossed paths with Palm by chance. He took Palm's life, fled the scene, then went back to his office to tell the security guard that the Prime Minister had been attacked. He then went on national TV to further confuse witnesses and ensure that the case was never solved. Engstrom passed away in 2000, and he would never answer for his crimes. As police didn't provide anything forensic or a definitive piece of evidence to confirm their theory, it left many people believing that the case was still unsolved. But officially, the cold case mystery is now closed. Number 2. The Dimalov Pass incident is by far one of the scariest stories to have come out of the Soviet Union. And even though it's a mostly solved mystery, it still leaves many people questioning what happened in the Ural Mountains one February night more than 60 years ago. It was February 20th, 1959, when the families of 8 students and a sports instructor who had gone hiking in the Urals raised the alarm that something strange had happened. The hikers had aimed to climb Mount Otorten and returned to their base by the 12th. But when one of the group, a 10th member who had fallen ill, had turned back on January 28th, the expedition leader, Igor Dyatlov, had warned that they were probably running a few days late. But when more than a week had passed from their expected arrival date, a search was sent out to look for the missing Russian hikers in what would eventually become known as the Dimalov Pass incident. The search was made up of students and staff members from the same university where most of the hikers were from. The Urals Polytechnic Institute was an extremely well-documented university, and all of the students had done well to gain admittance. They were studying a variety of courses from economics to engineering and physics. Semyon Zolotaryov, a sports instructor, was the only one of the group who wasn't a student, and had planned to be a part of a different expedition, but had ended up as part of Dyatlov's team. The search teams found the tent belonging to the missing expedition on February 26th. It was on the eastern slope of a mountain next to the Otorten. According to many, the name of the mountain translates to Mountain of Death in the language of the native Mansi people. As the scary mystery goes, the abandoned tent was partially buried in snow. It had been sliced open from the inside, and most of the belongings had been left behind in a hurry. Everything that was found at the scene deepened the already creepy mystery. Some frozen footprints could be seen in the snow, leading back to the slopes in the forest. How many people had made the tracks could not be determined. It was either all 9 of the missing hikers or just 8. Many of the footprints were barefoot or only wearing socks. Some of the hikers seemed to be only wearing one shoe. The tracks stopped after about 500 meters. Of course, the group didn't vanish into thin air. The day after the camp was found, the first of their bodies were discovered. 2 of the students were found in the woods beneath a tree, and near the tree, the remains of a small fire were found. They were dressed only in their underclothes. The tree that they were found under offered another strange clue to the unsolved mystery. The branches, some 5 feet up, had been broken as if someone had climbed up to it. It was speculated that this was either to look back at the camp or possibly to get firewood. 3 more missing hikers were found between the woods and the camp. It appeared they had been trying to crawl back to the camp during the incident. Dyatlov was among them. The bodies were examined to try to help solve the scary mystery, which was explained by hypothermia, though one of the students found between the wood and the camp was found with a large bruise on her side. The 4 other hikers remained missing in the woods for months. It was only when the snow melted a little in the spring that they were eventually found in the wilderness much later, buried in a ravine 75 meters away from where their bodies were found. These 4 had serious damage around the head and chest areas. They were wearing more clothes than the others, and it appeared as though they had stripped the clothes of their fallen friends to try to stay warm. Unfortunately, these missing people were not found alive either. Another disturbing part of the mystery was discovered with the bodies, as some were missing smaller body parts. An official investigation into the Dimalov Pass incident began. Using diaries and photos taken by the hikers, the investigation was able to piece together the last days of the expedition. After the 10th member of the expedition had left them, they carried on climbing for a few days. On the evening of February 1st, they stopped at the site where the camp was found. They cut into the snow slope to help shelter their tent from the wind, and settled in for the night. They slept in makeshift beds with their skis beneath them. It was at some point that night that the mysterious event occurred. An examination of the 4 hikers who were later found showed high degrees of internal damage consistent with sustaining a massive impact of some kind, though nothing was externally wrong. Their condition baffled experts, but before the investigation could go much further, the person leading it was prompted not to question these mysterious events any further. The official cause was ruled as an insurmountable force of nature. This conclusion didn't fully solve the case, and many speculated about what kind of scary mysteries could explain what had happened to the hikers before they were found. One of the earliest theories was that the group had been attacked by the Mansi people for encroaching on sacred land. Many who lived in nearby villages were questioned for weeks by Soviet authorities, but they could find no evidence that could link anybody to the mystery. The Mansi people were not strong enough to inflict the powerful internal impact that the hikers had sustained. Adding further doubt to the theory was that the hikers were nowhere near any sacred grounds. It was shortly after this avenue was ruled out that the official investigation was closed. Many people believed the government were covering something up, which wouldn't have been unheard of in the Soviet Union. Other hikers in the area at the time reported seeing strange balls of light in the sky, as did some of the nearby villagers. It was speculated that some kind of military testing had taken place, and the hikers had accidentally been caught up in it. People who believe this theory point to the fact that some of the bodies were found to have traces of radioactivity. It could be argued that this could be explained by the thorium present in camping lanterns. There are a few flaws to this theory, though. As well as there being no records of any tests found, it seems unlikely the military would have allowed a civilian search team to come across the bodies if they had been conducting secret experiments there. More outlandish theories like aliens or yetis were also proposed. However, the most likely answer to the mystery was both mundane and strange. The possibility that it was an avalanche that caused the creepy mystery was proposed early on. It was dismissed as the angle of the slope didn't seem to be enough to cause an avalanche, and the scene didn't seem to line up with that conclusion. It wasn't as if the tent had been buried under feet of snow, and there hadn't been any fresh snow the day the mystery occurred, but there had been wind. When modern scientists looked at the Dimalov Pass incident again, they found the slope was about 30 degrees, the minimum needed for an avalanche to occur. There had also been heavy rain the night of the incident, which would have blown the snow about and had the same impact as fresh snowfall. Combined with the fact that the group had cut into the slope, an avalanche was definitely possible. Scientists used computer models, which were in part created by the animators of the Disney movie Frozen, to analyze the impact of such an avalanche. Using data models from car safety experiments, they were able to prove that due to the fact that they were sleeping on top of their skis, the force of a relatively small avalanche would have been enough to cause the massive internal damage the hikers were found with, all without leaving any external marks. The models also showed that afterwards, not much of a sign of the avalanche would be found. This was also backed up by real-life horror stories pertaining to similar avalanches. The impact of the avalanche wouldn't be enough to take the lives of the hikers straight away, but as they couldn't get out of the wilderness and were out in -30-degree temperatures, they didn't survive very long. The conclusion that a small avalanche caused such a strange and scary mystery hasn't satisfied many people, who still believe the conspiracy theories. But with both science and a 2019 Russian investigation also concluding that an avalanche was responsible, this mystery can be considered solved. Number 1. In 1997, recreational divers at Coniston Waters in England's Lake District solved an eerie mystery that had puzzled the friends and family of Carol Ann Park for more than 20 years. Her body was found in a lake, wrapped up in one of her own garments that had been sewn together. At one point, the investigation into who had taken Carol's life began properly. Already, police had a prime suspect, but it would take another 7 years before he was convicted and the case was finally solved. Carol had gone missing in 1976, starting the first of the creepy mysteries. At the time, she was 30 years old and a primary school teacher. She was married to a man named Gordon Park, who she had known since she was a teenager. Park was also a school teacher. They had 3 children, including Carol's niece, who they had adopted when Carol's sister lost her life at the hands of her own boyfriend. According to many, including the adopted niece Vanessa, Park was very controlling. Both Carol and her husband had extramarital affairs, separated, and got back together after a custody battle. A friend once came over to mediate, only to find Park sitting on top of Carol. Sometime after that, Carol suddenly vanished. She became a missing person on July 17, 1976. The family had made plans to go to Blackpool for the day and enjoy the seaside, but that morning, Carol said that she was feeling unwell. Park decided to take the children without her. When he returned home later that day, she had gone missing. Carol's purse and suitcase remained at the home, as did her wedding and engagement rings. All these things she had taken the other times that she had left the family home. The day after Carol vanished without a trace, a group of friends came to visit from another part of the country. They described Park as being annoyed, and despite the fact that they had a relatively long journey to come see them, the friends were not invited in. Park waited until the end of the school summer holidays, when Carol would be getting ready to go back to work, to report her as a missing person, claiming that he thought Carol had run off with another man. This was despite the fact that she usually kept in touch with the family when she did so and took her belongings with her. There isn't much information about the initial investigation into Carol's strange disappearance, as the original missing person report vanished from the police station. It was just over 2 decades later, and she was still never found. Park remarried twice and continued his career as a teacher. He was bicycling in France when Carol's missing body was pulled out of the lake. Divers had at first thought that they had found an abandoned motor underwater, and it was only once they were on dry land that the true horror of their discovery was found. If the body had been dumped just a few meters further offshore, it would be likely Carol would have never been found. When Park returned from his holiday, he was arrested, but soon was released due to a lack of evidence. The unsolved case went cold again, but police never dropped their suspicion. Over the years, they collected more evidence. Rocks were found at the site where Carol's body had been left. Rocks which wouldn't have been found naturally at the bottom of that lake. A geologist confirmed that they were the same type that Parks' home had been built out of. The knots used to tie Carol's body were also an important clue to help solve the case. They were high-quality knots that only a sailor or a climber would have been able to tie. Park was both a sailor and a climber. In 2000, a documentary about the unsolved crime was broadcast. Watching the show was a man named Michael Wainwright. Wainwright was in the same holding facility as Park when Park had first been detained. According to Wainwright, Park had confessed the scary true story of what he had done to her, adding that she deserved it because she wasn't reliable to him and others. A second prisoner independently came to police with a similar story. Meanwhile, 2 witnesses say that an unknown suspect dropped a heavy-looking object into the lake around the time that the mysterious disappearance of Carol occurred. The descriptions matched Park. This wasn't enough for police to arrest Park again, though. In his home, they also found an object that could have created marks consistent with those found on Carol's remains. Though there wasn't any DNA evidence, the geological evidence, knot tying, and witness testimonies were enough to convince a jury that Park took Carol's life, and the mystery was finally solved. He was sentenced to life in prison and has never successfully appealed. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.